never liked sleeping with the closet doors open. It's one of those habits I can't fully explain without sounding dramatic, but it's always been there. If there's a closet in the room, I close it before I sleep, every single time. Even in hotels, even at other people's houses, especially at other people's houses. An open, dark doorway in a room where I'm supposed to be unconscious just feels wrong. My brain refuses to relax knowing that there's a black space I can't see into. It's really that bad for me. So when I say my worst fear played out one night, I'm not exaggerating. I still don't know what it was exactly. I don't know if it was sleep paralysis mixed with a vivid nightmare, or if something genuinely crossed a line that night. All I know is that it didn't feel imagined, and it didn't fade the way dreams usually do. I still remember every detail like it just happened. I was staying the night at my dad's place. My parents split when I was really young, so weekends were usually spent going back and forth. His house always felt quieter than my mom's, bigger and more empty. That night itself was completely normal. I did my usual routine before bed, went to the bathroom, turned the lights off, then walked straight to the closet to make sure it was shut. It wasn't a sliding door, it was one of those older closets with a solid door and a round knob that sticks out a bit. You had to pull it and push it closed as it didn't swing open on its own. I checked it twice and made sure I heard it click. Then I got into bed and fell asleep pretty quickly. I don't know how long I was asleep before it started. What I remember is becoming aware before actually waking up. If you've ever experienced this, you already know what I mean. It was that strange in-between state where you're not dreaming, but you're not fully conscious either. Except this time I couldn't move. I tried to roll over, but nothing happened. I tried to lift my arm, tried to open my mouth to call out for help. Nothing came out. By that point, I was fully awake. My mind felt clear and I knew exactly where I was. I could even feel my heart racing. I was breathing, but it felt shallow, like my body wasn't responding properly. While I was lying there, aware and unable to move, I heard the worst thing in the world. It was the slow creak of the wooden closet door beginning to open. I didn't need to look to know what it was. I tried to turn my head toward the sound, but I couldn't move a muscle. I tried to scream, but nothing happened. Out of the corner of my eye, I could just see enough to tell the door was opening. The dark space inside was getting wider. Then I heard footsteps. They were slow and uneven, like someone dragging their feet instead of lifting them properly. Each step crossed the floor at a steady pace, one after another, getting closer to me. I still couldn't see anything clearly. My head wouldn't turn and my eyes wouldn't focus past a certain point. But I could hear something moving out of the closet and into the room. The footsteps stopped before reaching the bed. I don't know how far it was. That part is fuzzy. I just know it never touched me. That's all I remember. I don't remember falling asleep again either. There's a gap, like someone cut a piece out of my memory. When I tell this story, I know how cliche it sounds. I don't expect people to believe me. But there's a part that still messes with me. When I woke up for real, it was morning. Sunlight was coming through the window, and the house sounded normal again. For a second, I felt that deep relief you get after a nightmare, when you realize you're safe. Then I saw the closet. The door was open, all the way. I sat up straight, staring at it in disbelief. For years, checking closet doors had become an automatic, non-negotiable habit for me. That door didn't open easily. You had to pull it. It stayed exactly where you left it. Someone had opened it while I was asleep. I got out of bed and closed it. I didn't tell my dad about it. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't even know how to explain what had happened. For a long time, I treated it like a nightmare, just an unusually vivid one. Years later, I learned about sleep paralysis, how your body can shut down before your brain does, how your mind can project sounds, movement, and the feeling of a presence into the room. When you put things that way, it makes more sense. But there's one part that still doesn't sit right with me. I never saw anything. Most people talk about figures, shapes, faces. I didn't. I only heard it. I knew exactly where the sound came from. The one place in the room I always made sure was closed. And when I woke up, it was open. I've never had sleep paralysis ever since. I've never heard footsteps in my room again. But I still remember lying there, fully awake, listening to something walk out of a space that should have stayed empty. I don't know if my brain was misfiring or if my brain knew exactly what it was afraid of. Either way, it happened, and I hope it never does again. This is the craziest thing that has ever happened to me. A few years after I graduated, I started going back to my old college stadium to run the track. It was a smaller D1 school, with enough history that the locals still cared about it. A couple guys made the NFL there, so people treat the place with a weird kind of respect. The stadium itself is old, built somewhere in the 50s. It's hard to explain, but if you've ever been somewhere that holds onto energy, this place was it. This particular night, I had a rough day at work and wanted some space, so I figured I'd run a few miles and get a sweat going. By the time I got there, the sun had already set. The sky still had that deep blue haze, but it was fading fast. The stadium lights were off, and only a few distant street lamps were lit, providing me with minimal light. I could see just enough to run, but not much beyond that. The bleachers were completely black, like a solid wall. I settled into my pace, doing slow laps around the track and trying to zone out. But a few minutes into my run, I started hearing noises. It would start as this soft metal clink coming from somewhere in the stands, followed by a scraping noise. Then silence. A short while later, it happened again. Same sound, with the same pause afterward. It didn't feel random. It felt spaced out, like something moving slowly through the bleachers. I slowed down and looked toward the stands, but because it was so dark, I couldn't see a thing. The darkness was too thick, and nothing stood out. I tried to brush it off. I told myself it was probably the stadium cooling down or maybe something loose shifting in the structure. But it didn't feel like that. I felt like something was up there, moving carefully. I started getting an uneasy sense of being watched, like something I couldn't see was focused on me while I was running. I kept jogging, but I found myself glancing toward the stands more than I should have. So as a result, I decided to cut the run short. I went home and thought that would be the end of it. But that same night, I ended up having a dream. In the dream, I was back at the stadium. Instead of running the track, I was sitting in the stands watching myself run. Everything looked exactly the same. The lighting, the sky, the silence. I looked down and saw myself running in the same clothes I'd worn earlier that night. I don't know if it was some kind of out-of-body thing or just a weird dream, but I wasn't alone in the stands. Someone or something was sitting a few seats away from me. I couldn't make out any details, just the outline of a person. They weren't moving. They were watching the field the same way I was. I tried to say something, but nothing came out. Then the figure stood up and hovered a few steps toward me. When that happened, I heard the sound of their shoes hitting metal. That same clinking sound I'd heard earlier when I was running. They stopped in front of me and started pointing. First at the field, then at the seat they'd been sitting in, then back at the field, over and over again. It felt like they were trying to show me something but couldn't explain it. As I kept gesturing, I started to get this uncomfortable sense that I was right on the edge of understanding, like the meaning was forming but never quite finished. That's when I woke up. My heart was pounding and I just lay there staring at the ceiling, replaying everything. The dream felt different from the usual random stuff your brain throws together. It stayed with me. I didn't fall back asleep. The next day, I ended up back at the stadium. I hadn't planned to go. I just found myself driving there without really thinking about it. In daylight, the place looked completely normal. People were jogging the track. It felt like any other public space. But I couldn't stop thinking about the dream. More specifically, I couldn't stop thinking about the seat. So I walked up into the stands. About halfway up, something immediately caught my attention. One seat in the middle of the row was purple. Every other seat around it was the same faded gray metal I remembered from when I was a student. But this one looked newer. It even reflected sunlight differently. When I stepped closer, I noticed a small plaque bolted underneath it. It read, "Reserved to honor those who will always be part of this place." Nothing else. It hit me right away that this was the exact same seat from the dream. Same row, same view of the field. Later that night, I looked into it and found out the school installs those purple seats as memorials. Each one honors a student, staff member, or athlete who had a strong connection to the program. That detail stuck with me because that was where the noise came from. That was where the figure had been sitting. I've never really told anyone this in person. It's hard to explain without sounding crazy, and I don't even know what kind of response I would expect. I still go back to the stadium sometimes, only during the day, and every time I'm there, I glance up toward that seat. I don't know the meaning of all this. I don't know who I saw, but I know that seat wasn't empty that night. And every once in a while, when the wind moves through the bleachers just right, I hear that same soft clinking sound. When that happens, I stop what I'm doing and look up, because it still feels like someone's up there, waiting, trying to be heard. This is long, so I'm sorry in advance. I've never really told it this way online before. Usually I just say something weird happened when I was a kid and leave it at that. But there's more to it. I was about 11 years old, and even now, all these years later, no one has ever been able to explain it. When you press your ear into a pillow, you can hear your heartbeat. Most people know that now, but when you're a kid, it feels new. The muffled rhythm is steady and deep in your ear. What I heard didn't sound like a heartbeat. To me, it sounded like footsteps, soft ones, like someone walking across carpet. And for some reason, I only heard them at night, right as I was drifting off. Most nights, just as I was about to fall asleep, I'd hear what sounded like footsteps coming toward my bed, and it would jolt me fully awake. Back then, I lived alone with my mom, just the two of us in a double-wide house near the edge of a quiet neighborhood. There were woods all around us. During the day, I'd play in them. At night, they felt different. It was probably just my imagination. Kids fill in the blanks with monsters, and I was no exception. The house also had a crawl space underneath it. Between that and the woods, my head was full of ways I could disappear, and no one would ever know. I told my mom about the footsteps, a lot of times actually. One night she squirted warm water into my ears with a turkey baster to flush out the sound. She meant well, but it didn't help. Not long after we moved there, something else started happening. Every so often, I'd wake up on the bottom bunk instead of the top. I was an only child, so the bottom bunk was empty. At first, it didn't scare me. I assumed I must have climbed down half asleep and just didn't remember doing it. It happened regularly, sometimes once a week, sometimes twice. Then one night, I didn't wake up in the bottom bunk. I woke up outside in the woods. And not the ones near my house. The first thing I noticed was how cold I was. That's what woke me up. The second thing I noticed was the stars. No ceiling, no walls. I sat up slowly and tried to get my bearings. At first I thought I was dreaming. That made the most sense. But nothing shifted or flickered the way dreams usually do. It all felt solid. There was a pool float a few feet away from me. One of those big inflatable ones shaped like a shark. That somehow made it worse. It was so out of place that I couldn't make sense of it. I stood up, and the moment I put weight on my right foot, I collapsed back down. A sharp pain shot up my leg. I'd stepped on a thorn. In the moonlight, I could see they were everywhere, tiny ones scattered across the ground. I checked my other foot, but it was fine. Actually, the rest of me was fine too. No scratches, no dirt, nothing that made sense. I looked like I had just gotten out of bed. I cried for a little while, but eventually I stood back up. I didn't know where I was, but standing still didn't feel any better than moving. So I picked a direction and started walking. I didn't call out. I didn't know who else might be out there. I walked for what felt like hours. I tried to go in a straight line, but I was 11. Every time I hit a thick patch of brush or had to go around fallen trees, I lost track. About halfway through, I heard the only sound that truly scared me. A high, warbling cry somewhere in the distance. It might have just been a cat, but I panicked and ran. Zigzagging through the dark, branches scraping my arms, my feet getting worse by the minute. Eventually, I slowed down and forced myself to look where I was going. Step by step, just the ground in front of me. And I think that's why I didn't notice what was ahead until it was too late. It was the pool float. The same shark, deflated and lying on its side. I was back where I started. I didn't scream or cry this time. I just stood there and felt it wash over me. A quiet kind of despair. Like I'd done everything I could and still ended up right back at the beginning. Maybe I'd walked in a giant circle. Maybe I'd gotten turned around. Either way, I was lost. That's when I remembered the North Star. I thought it was just the brightest one, so I picked what looked brightest and started walking toward it. It's strange to think about now how lucky I was that it eventually led somewhere. The first thing I recognized was a dirt ditch where me and my friends used to throw clods at each other. Then I saw the roof of my house above one of the lower hills. I started crying again. Then I ran. As I rounded the final corner and got a full view of the house, I froze. Every light inside was on. The porch, the kitchen, even my mom's bedroom. The whole place was lit up like it was the middle of the day. I moved toward the steps, then stopped again when I realized someone was inside. A silhouette passed behind the curtains. It looked like a tall man. I knew it wasn't my mom. I stood in the yard, unsure if I should run or keep going. Eventually, I climbed the steps, one creaking board at a time, and reached for the doorknob, my heart pounding in my ears. Just as I was about to turn it, the door opened. The man I'd seen inside stepped into the porch light wearing a uniform. It was a police officer. I froze. I couldn't speak. I still had no idea what was happening. Then my mom appeared behind him and pulled me into her arms. She was crying hard, repeating my name, squeezing me so tightly it hurt. Eventually, she let go just enough to look at me. She asked why I'd run away. I told her I didn't. I'd been trying to come home. She looked confused. Then the officer stepped past her and set a piece of paper on the kitchen table. They told me they'd found it on my pillow, a letter written in crayon, in blocky handwriting that looked like mine. It said I was unhappy, that I didn't want to live there anymore, that I never wanted to see my mom or my friends again. The tone was cold and strangely deliberate, like someone trying too hard to imitate how a child would run away from home. My mom knelt beside me. She said it looked like something I'd written myself. I picked it up again and read it more slowly. That's when I saw it, right there in blocky crayon, the name Jackson, spelled with a K and an S instead of an X. That's not how I spell my name. Mine was spelled differently, 2 letters off, just enough to look right to someone else, but not me. I looked up at her and said the only thing I could. This isn't how you spell my name. The whole room went quiet. The officer didn't speak. My mom didn't argue. She just looked back down at the page, and I saw the change in her face when she realized I was right. To this day, I don't know how I got out of the house that night, or how I ended up in those woods. I don't know who wrote that letter, or why it sounded like me. But it wasn't. I only know that something tried to replace the truth with a story, and it almost worked. Fortunately, it's never happened ever since. My grandmother had the same dream for most of her life. She told me about it when I was a kid, and again when I was older. What stayed with me was that the details never changed. In the dream, she was always alone, walking down a long, dark hallway. She would move forward in silence until she reached the last door on the left. She would stop there, place her hand on the doorknob, and open it. Then she'd wake up. That was the dream, every time. She told me she never saw what was inside the room. She never heard anything, and she never felt like something was chasing her. It was always the hallway, the turn, the door, and walking up right before seeing whatever was on the other side. She had this dream once or twice a year for as long as she could remember. Sometimes it came during stressful parts of her life. Sometimes it came out of nowhere. But the ending was always the same. She said it didn't exactly scare her. It was the feeling the dream left behind, like she was meant to see something but wasn't ready yet. That was how she described it, not ready. The dream followed her throughout childhood, through marriage, and through raising kids. It became a part of her life, the same way people live with migraines or recurring nightmares. Some people had bad dreams. She had what she called the halfway dream. Then one year, it stopped. It didn't fade gradually. It didn't change. It simply never happened again. For a long time, she assumed she had finally grown out of it. She didn't connect the dream ending to anything in particular, at least not right away. Around that same time, she and my grandfather took a road trip with her 2 kids, my dad and my aunt. They were moving from place to place, staying in cheap hotels, eating at diners, and figuring things out as they went. One night, they booked a hotel last minute. Because it was peak season, the only rooms available were 2 separate rooms on opposite ends of the same floor. My grandmother took one room by herself. My dad and my aunt stayed in the other room with my grandfather. He snored badly, and apparently that arrangement had become normal on trips. My dad told me this part years later, and every time he did, his tone changed. He said he woke up sometime around 3 in the morning. Nothing specific woke him. He just opened his eyes with the feeling that something wasn't right, even though he couldn't explain why. The room was dark and quiet. He sat up and called for his dad. No answer. He reached over and switched on the bedside lamp. My aunt was still asleep in the other bed. My grandfather was lying on his side, facing away, exactly how he usually slept. My dad leaned closer and said his name again. Still nothing. He shook his shoulder. Nothing. He told me later that the first thing he noticed was how cold his skin felt. He didn't know CPR. He didn't know what a heart attack looked like. He just knew his father wasn't waking up. So he ran, barefoot, crying, down the hallway to the room where my grandmother was staying. When she opened the door, she looked confused and exhausted. My dad always mentioned one detail that stayed with him. She didn't look angry. She didn't look startled. She looked tired. Before she could ask anything, he told her something was wrong with Dad. She didn't say a word. She put on her shoes and followed him back down the hallway. Years later, my dad realized something about that walk. The hallway looked exactly like the one my grandmother had described in her dream for decades. Long, carpeted, dim lights, doors lining the left side. They stopped in front of the last door on the left. My grandmother reached for the doorknob. She paused for a moment, then she opened it. My grandfather was lying in bed. He had died in his sleep. The doctors later said it was a massive heart attack. He was 45 years old. He had already been gone before my dad ever woke up. I didn't hear the story until I was in high school. My dad never told it in a dramatic way. He never framed it as paranormal. He never called it a prophecy or a warning. He just said he couldn't explain it. But he had a thought about it. He once told me it felt like my grandmother had been slowly led toward that moment for most of her life. Not to frighten her, not to show her what was waiting, just to make the path familiar, so that when she finally had to walk it for real, she wouldn't fall apart. My grandmother rarely spoke about what she felt in that room. Years later, I asked her once when we were sitting alone at her kitchen table on a quiet summer evening. I asked what it felt like to see him. She didn't answer right away. She stared into her tea for a long time. Then she looked at me and said quietly, "It was in the room." I asked if she had been scared. She shook her head. Not because losing him didn't hurt, not because death didn't frighten her, but because standing outside that door had become familiar long before that night. Before I left, she said something else I've never forgotten. "You're not supposed to see everything at once," she said. "Only what you're ready for." She passed away 5 years ago. I still think about that dream sometimes. I don't know what it was. I only know that when the real door finally came, she opened it.